The toothbrush was the first giveaway, hers, the purple one with the frayed bristles, sitting bone-dry in the cup beside the sink, even though she'd just left the shower 10 minutes ago claiming she was late for work because she'd taken too long brushing her teeth. I stood there staring at it like it was a crime scene clue. Because let's be honest, anyone rushing out of the house dripping in fake urgency doesn't forget to wet their damn toothbrush. I didn't say anything, just hummed softly as I brewed the coffee, watching the lie dance in my mind like a cheap magician pulling scars from his sleeve. Then came the scent, sharp, cologne-laced, not mine, lingering faintly on the towel she'd accidentally left on my pillow, the one she never used because she thought it smelled like mildew. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there in that house we'd shared for 8 years, tracing every abnormality like a detective tracing the outline of a body at a murder scene. She thought I was stupid, no, worse, complacent. Like I'd just keep going through the motions, cooking Sunday breakfast while she slipped out to service her office emergencies. But this morning was different. There was a smear of lipstick inside her wrist, a brand she'd stopped wearing 2 years ago after I told her I liked the darker shades better. The tube had been tossed hastily into her purse, but it was the pink kind, the one she swore was too teenage. The same one her intern wore. I knew because I'd met the intern at the last company party, all giggles and low blouses, dangling compliments over her like bait. That girl worshipped my wife, shadowed her like a puppy. And my wife had smiled, basking in the attention, not knowing I caught the look that passed between them in the glass reflection of the office doors. That little flash of something not quite professional. I remembered that look. I'd seen it once before, years ago, when she used to look at me like I was the sun before she realized she preferred artificial light. So I let the day unravel. I didn't call or text. I didn't ask how her strategy meeting went. I just waited, observed. And when she came home, the first thing she did was shower. Again. Said she felt gross from sitting all day. Except her car mileage showed an extra 42 miles, and I knew her office was 10 from the house. Maybe she got lost on the freeway. Maybe she detoured through shame. I didn't ask. She kissed me, lips dry, fingers cold, no eye contact. That night, I opened her laptop while she snored beside me, and for a woman who prided herself on discretion, she was criminally lazy with her passwords. There it was, a message thread with her intern, under a fake contact name, Rebecca HR. Classy. I scrolled. Text so thick with innuendo they might as well have come with a moan track. I miss the way you smell. You're so good at hiding the marks. Can't wait to feel your mouth again. I closed the laptop. Not from rage. Rage is loud and stupid. But from calculation. Because the moment I read that last message, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt curious. I wanted to know how far this had gone. I wanted to catalog every detail, every slip-up, every blind spot. My mind clicked into place like a puzzle locking down. I remembered her boss, Claudia, a woman whose voice could bend steel. Ice cold, stunning, and commanding enough to make CEOs stammer. We'd met briefly, her grip firm, eyes like razors, the type of woman who didn't tolerate amateurs. And I'd seen the tension between her and my wife too. Hierarchical. Claudia looked at my wife like she was a mildly disappointing intern who kept missing the big picture. And suddenly, I knew exactly what my next move would be. I wouldn't confront. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't even leave. Not yet. I would replace her. Publicly. Perfectly. And with someone who would make her entire existence look like a punchline. Because the only thing worse than being betrayed is being forgotten by someone who traded up. And I was about to climb the goddamn ladder right over her career corpse. Quietly. Strategically. With a glass of wine in one hand and Claudia's number in the other. It was almost impressive how well she faked the rhythm of a happy marriage, how she still kissed me on the cheek every morning, how she still made that awful turmeric smoothie she thought would boost our longevity, how she still curled up next to me on the couch with her legs draped over mine like nothing had changed. And for a while, I believed nothing had. I told myself we were just getting older, busier, more career-focused. She'd started reading more self-help books, underlining phrases like personal evolution requires discomfort, and you cannot be someone else's home if you've never built your own. I remember thinking it sounded profound until I realized it was just poetic justification for detachment. She started working late more often, not unusually at first. We were both ambitious, after all, but then the explanations got thinner, vaguer. Client dinner, team strategy huddle, mental reset walk. Once, she said she needed to reconnect with her essence, and I had no idea whether that meant yoga, therapy, or a secret apartment. She bought a new phone case, rose gold, glittery, not her style at all, and when I asked about it, she shrugged and said it made her feel like a different woman. I laughed, but not fully. Her closet began filling with clothes I'd never seen her wear. Edgier stuff, tighter, darker, almost performative. And then there were the purchases, a second gym membership across town, supposedly because the lighting at the downtown studio was better. A $400 vibrating face sculptor from an influencer she didn't even follow. A weekend trip with old friends I'd never met, no photos posted, no souvenirs brought back. I tried not to care. Tried to support her self-care journey, tried to understand her need for space. She'd started using that word a lot, space. Like she was orbiting away from me in slow, calculated spirals. She still smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Or worse, it did, but not for me. She started locking her phone. Nothing overt, just a gentle angle of the screen away from me, a quiet swipe when I walked into the room. Her laugh changed too, or maybe I just started noticing it, the way it rose too quickly, like she was trying to convince herself something was funny. Conversations turned to monologues about her potential, about how she felt like she'd been asleep for years and was finally waking up. I didn't know what to say to that. I hadn't been sleeping. I'd been there, present, building a life with her, supporting her through every work crisis, every family drama, every late-night breakdown when the world felt too heavy. I thought that was what love was, being the constant. But apparently, I was the background character in her personal growth montage. Once, I found a receipt in her car for a seafood dinner, 2 entrees, 2 wines, a dessert. She hates seafood. Claims it's too fishy. I stared at the slip of paper for 10 minutes, trying to convince myself it was a business meal, a team dinner, maybe even a sympathy hangout with some struggling intern. But something in my chest tightened. The scent in her car was different too. Not perfume, deodorant, muskier. Not hers. I didn't ask. I didn't want to see her lie to my face. I still needed to believe she loved me. That all the cracks were just growing pains. I told myself maybe she was going through a phase, some sort of late 30s existential unraveling. She mentioned wanting to dye her hair blonde, to get a tattoo, to go on a solo retreat to Costa Rica to find herself. She'd always been organized, logical, suddenly she was chaotic in her freedom. And I applauded it. I bought her the ticket. I helped her pack. I told her to journal every moment, to embrace the change. Even though every cell in my body was screaming that she wasn't coming back the same person. That maybe she wasn't coming back for me. I remember lying in bed the night she was gone, scrolling through her Instagram, only to realize I couldn't see her stories anymore. Her profile was still there, still open, still smiling, but I was invisible to it now. She claimed it was a glitch, blamed the algorithm, and I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe so badly that I almost gaslit myself into it. But the truth was simpler and crueler. She was already deleting me in real time. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was her past, her safety net, her stability, a word she now used like a synonym for boredom. And still, I said nothing. Still, I held on to the illusion, hoping if I stayed steady enough, she'd remember who we were. But the truth? She hadn't forgotten. She'd outgrown it, at least in her mind. The betrayal hadn't landed yet, but the ghost of it was already moving in, sleeping between us, whispering in her voice, using her smile. And I kept hoping I was wrong. Even as the woman I loved transformed into someone who no longer had room for me. It happened on a Tuesday, quiet, forgettable, overcast, one of those days that doesn't scream catastrophe, but instead walks up and whispers it in your ear with a voice so calm it feels like hypnosis. She'd left her work tablet charging on the kitchen counter, screen lit, messages blooming across it like rot under the surface of polished skin. I wasn't snooping. I never had to, because she trusted me enough to believe I wouldn't look, and that was her first mistake. I was pouring coffee when the notification appeared. Can't stop thinking about this morning. Still feel you on my lips. No name. Just a number. And that was what made it worse, because anyone worth hiding doesn't get saved as a contact. I watched the screen go dark, then tapped it with the back of my knuckle, as if testing the weight of the betrayal, like it might shatter under my touch. Another message pinged. Tell him you're staying late again. I'll bring wine and that thing you like. That thing. That thing. The phrase chewed through me with clinical precision, not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I did, and I had never once been on the receiving end of anything she called that thing. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't change. I didn't even blink. I simply looked out the window, watched a squirrel run along the fence, and felt something in me evaporate. That was the moment she lost me, not the moment she cheated. No, That had happened long ago, in stolen whispers and unearned smiles. This was the moment she confirmed it. Through the casualness of it. Through the sheer comfort of her deceit. She came home that evening humming, shopping bags in hand. Something overpriced and tasteless from one of those boutique places where every item costs more than the sum of its function. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I wanted to do a screen-free dinner. I said sure. She didn't notice the way I looked at her, not like a man watching his wife, but like a biologist observing a parasite under glass, fascinated, disgusted, clinical. I sat across from her and listened to her talk about a team rebranding strategy. She used phrases like reclaiming feminine identity and realigning passion with purpose, and I nodded, even smiled, while my mind spiraled through every possible outcome. I didn't need confirmation anymore. I had it. Now, I needed leverage, timing, precision. Because betrayal is messy, but revenge is math. And I'm very, very good at math. I said goodnight to her like always. Pulled her close in bed. I even kissed her neck and told her she smelled nice. She giggled, and nestled into me like we were newlyweds. And that was when I decided I was going to destroy her. Not in rage, not in violence, but in reputation and image and status. I would make her look in the mirror and wish she had never found whatever it was she thought she found between another man's sheets. Because what she failed to understand is that men like me don't lose. We wait. We observe. We calculate. And when the time comes, we don't scream. We whisper. And the world listens. She thought she was clever, and that was her biggest mistake, because while she was busy perfecting her little affair like a high school girl with a secret crush, I was turning into smoke, slipping through every crack in her alibi, watching from places she didn't even think to look. I started simple, asked her what she wanted for dinner one night while she claimed she was stuck at the office, then had her favorite sushi delivered to her desk with a handwritten note from me, just a playful, innocent gesture, the kind she used to swoon over. 20 minutes later, the delivery driver called to say the office was dark, the security guard said she hadn't signed in, and no one by her name had been there all afternoon. I thanked him, hung up, and deleted the message from my phone. That was the first real confirmation, not just of her absence, but of how easily she'd fallen out of the habit of lying well. I didn't confront her when she came home smelling like vanilla and mint, someone else's cologne, scrubbed desperately under the lie of body spray. I just kissed her cheek and asked, casually, how the report presentation went. She blinked too long before answering. Rookie move. Next, I created a fake profile, nothing obvious, just a soft-spoken graphic designer with mutual interests and a feed filled with curated banality. I sent her best friend a message, complimenting her latest outfit post, and watched the online interaction bloom. Within 2 days, she mentioned she was just hanging out with Paige again over drinks. Paige, who I now knew had been dropping pins at the same wine bar every Thursday, just long enough for my wife to slip in, act seen, and then vanish down the block into someone else's passenger seat. I tracked the pins, collected screenshots, cross-referenced her plans with Uber receipts from our joint account she didn't think I monitored. Her destination one night? A street that had no restaurants, no theaters, just a row of low-rise apartment buildings and one budget boutique hotel. I noted the name, logged the date, said nothing. A week later, I found a second credit card in her purse, one I didn't recognize. She'd opened it in her maiden name, tied to a separate P.O. box with charges to lingerie stores, Uber rides, and digital purchases from subscription sites she'd once mocked as for people with nothing better to do. I took a photo of the card, backed up the bank statement to a secure drive. Still, I spoke no words of accusation. I simply cooked dinner, poured her wine, and asked about her day, listening closely as she spun her fiction. Long meetings, she'd say, eyes darting slightly. Too many emails. I smiled and asked who led the meeting. She gave a name. I already knew that person had been out sick. I let her lie hang in the air like spoiled meat, savoring the rot. Then came the key play. I borrowed her car one morning while mine was getting serviced, installed a GPS tracker behind the glove box, a discreet one, no app notification, no signal light, just a slow drip of her movement feeding into my laptop every few hours. That same evening, she claimed she was going to yoga. Her car sat parked for 2 hours behind a craft beer bar. I drove by slowly, unnoticed, and saw her sitting in someone else's passenger seat, face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, her laugh open, uninhibited, shameless. I didn't stop. I didn't even flinch. I just drove past and cataloged it all. The next day, I asked her how yoga was. She smiled, tired, and said the instructor really pushed her. I nodded, said I was glad she was taking care of herself, and kissed her forehead. Inside, I was counting down. Every lie she told became another nail. Every moment she thought she'd fooled me became another step toward the news she was building with her own words. I wasn't looking for a confession. I was building a case. A comprehensive, bulletproof, elegantly devastating case. She thought I was drifting, losing interest, too caught up in work to notice her late nights and distant eyes. She didn't know I'd already downloaded her phone back up to my own machine. She didn't know I had screenshots of texts from a man saved under the name Marcy Nails, telling her how beautiful she looked the night before. She didn't know I'd called the number once from a burner, heard a man answer with a grunt, and hung up with a smile. She didn't know I'd followed him one night, not her, waited until he left the bar where they met, watched him stumble into his sad little sedan, and noted the license plate. She didn't know I'd found his Instagram through a reverse image search on his WhatsApp profile picture, that I'd already printed out every public photo he had, already cross-checked the gym bag he left in her trunk that she claimed was just something she borrowed. She didn't know I'd spoken to Claudia, her boss, under the pretense of consulting on a project, and slipped in a comment about how dedicated my wife had been to late hours, only to be met with a confused pause and a reply that she hadn't stayed late in months. She didn't know I'd been mapping her downfall with the precision of a sniper. She thought I was blind. She thought she was in control. But I'd already set the board, and her king was surrounded. It was at a gallery opening, one of those overly curated, minimalist things with white wine and whispered critique, the kind of event where she could wear heels that clicked against polished floors and pretend she was more important than she really was. That I chose to end the illusion. She'd invited me herself, smug in her confidence, draped in a black dress she hadn't worn for me in over a year, the one I'd once called dangerous. The irony wasn't lost on me. I played the part perfectly, smiled at her friends, nodded through conversations about light composition and interpretive contrast, even complimented her co-worker's latest piece, a jagged sculpture that looked like betrayal incarnate. She was glowing, radiating that false serenity only liars wear when they think the truth is buried too deep to reach. And then, at exactly 8:17 p.m., when I knew he'd arrive, because I'd watched him text her "can't wait to see that dress in person," I excused myself from a conversation, stepped aside, and gave the nod to the man behind the soundboard. The gallery owner owed me a favor. The next exhibit screen lit up, right on cue, in the center of the room, supposed to showcase a rotating slideshow of local artists. Instead, it began displaying a high-definition series of images, each one sharper than the last. Her, straddling him in a car parked behind the bar. Her, holding his face at a motel entrance. Her, lying shirtless on a hotel bed, laughing into the camera while biting his finger. There were gasps. Not from me. From her. She turned so fast I thought she might snap her neck, her face draining of every drop of pretense. She rushed to the soundboard, whispering furiously, but the operator only shrugged. It was all pre-scheduled, and besides, the remote wasn't in her hands anymore. It was in mine. She spun toward me, wide-eyed, and forced a smile like maybe it was all a mistake. Maybe I'd been hacked. Maybe some deranged artist was using her likeness. "It's not what you think," she said, stepping toward me, hands half raised like I was a wounded animal she needed to calm. "They're old pictures. From before we got serious again." I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just tilted my head slightly, watching her spin, watching her look to the crowd and then back to me, like she wasn't sure who she needed to convince more. "We were just talking, okay? It was complicated. You've been distant. Cold. I didn't know how to reach you anymore." Her voice cracked in just the right spot, the trained actress flailing for sympathy in front of strangers. She reached for my hand, and I let her touch it. For a moment. Then I pulled it back and looked her in the eyes, not like a man in pain, but like a judge handing down a sentence. "I was cold," I said quietly, just enough for the silence in the room to carry it. Because I was starting to smell the rot. Her mouth opened, closed. She tried again. He meant nothing. I didn't feel anything for him. I stepped closer, not touching her, not even looking angry, just present, unwavering, like a mirror she couldn't look away from. "But you felt enough to lie. Every day. In our home. With my name on your mouth and his hands on your skin." The room had gone still. People pretended to look at the art, but no one moved. She shook her head, too fast, too frantically. "You don't understand," she snapped, voice rising. "You checked out years ago. You buried yourself in work and silence, and I was alone. You made me feel invisible. I let the silence hang there, long and thick. Then I whispered, no. I just stopped clapping for the performance. She flinched, visibly, and something cracked behind her eyes because she knew this wasn't the part where I screamed or cried or begged. This was the part where the applause stopped. This was the part where the audience walked out, unimpressed by the drama. She laughed, sharp and desperate, trying to claw back the upper hand. So what now? She spat, eyes narrowing. You gonna play victim? Humiliate me like a child? Feel like a big man again? She wanted a reaction. She needed it. But all I gave her was stillness. No, I said, voice even. I just wanted you to see what truth looks like when it isn't hiding behind locked phones and deadbolt excuses. She stepped back, eyes darting to the door, to the crowd, to the man who still hadn't shown up, because I'd sent him a message from her phone hours ago, telling him not to come, that it was over, that it was getting too risky. He'd replied with one word, coward. I'd smiled when I saw it. Because cowards never show up when it matters. And now, neither would he. She was alone. Finally. Exposed under sterile lights, wrapped in a dress meant to seduce, but now it just looked like armor peeling off. I didn't move. I didn't leave. I just watched as the tension snapped, as she stood in the middle of the gallery with everyone pretending not to see her collapse. And I let the silence hang there, unfinished, unforgiving, because the final blow was still coming. She found me in the parking lot 20 minutes after the gallery detonated, face streaked with mascara, voice already shaking with the first signs of fury and fear, and she came at me like a firestorm cloaked in victimhood, no hesitation, no shame. Just raw, manipulative instinct clawing for control. You humiliated me, she hissed, eyes blazing, pacing in tight circles like a cornered animal, in front of everyone. You planned this. You sick bastard. Do you know what you've done? I leaned against the driver's side door, watching her melt down in slow motion, arms crossed, saying nothing, because her words didn't land anymore. They just echoed. We could have fixed this, she shouted. We could have talked. But no, you had to turn it into a goddamn show. Still, I said nothing. Her voice cracked. She stepped closer. You smothered me. For years. You were predictable, dull, obsessed with routine. I was dying in that house. I blinked slowly, like watching a drunk stranger scream into the void. She shook her head, pacing again, teeth clenched. You always wanted control. Always needed to be the smart one. The calm one. The one who made all the plans. Well, guess what? You didn't plan this right, did you? She was slipping. Slipping hard. I watched her spiral with the detachment of someone watching a performance that had long since lost its magic. You were boring, she spat, venom on her tongue now, predictable. Safe. That's all you ever were, safe. No fire. No chaos. Just spreadsheets and silence. I needed more than that. I nodded slightly, then murmured, so you downgraded to a man who thinks a motel bed is romantic. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. At least he listened. She snapped. At least he didn't act like he was doing me a favor every time he touched me. I smiled, slow and hollow. No, he just did you the favor of making sure I never wanted to touch you again. She flinched. Real hurt. That landed. But she was too far gone to admit it. You think you're better than me? She sneered. You think standing there in your perfect little bubble makes you superior? I looked her dead in the eyes and said, no, I don't need to think it. I know it. That's why I didn't grovel. That's why I didn't beg. That's why I'm not the one standing in a parking lot crying over a life I destroyed. That silence afterward, it was thick. Suffocating. Her breathing hitched. She tried again, softer this time, a fake tremble creeping into her voice. You don't get it. I was lonely. You shut down. I cut her off with a whisper. You needed attention. So you sold your dignity to the first man who smiled. And now you want pity for the price you paid. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. But I hadn't even raised my voice. That's what broke her. That cold steadiness. That complete lack of rage. Because I wasn't fighting. I wasn't trying to win her back. I was gone, emotionally evacuated, and she knew it. You can't just walk away from this, she growled, desperate now, shaking her head like a child denied a toy. You think you can just erase me? I looked at her and said, you erased yourself the moment you started hiding behind locked screens and motel doors. I'm just sweeping up the ashes. She took a step back, panic now rising in her throat. You don't love me anymore, she whispered, like it had just dawned on her. I gave her the final blow with a surgical smile. No, I don't even remember what it felt like to. And just like that, her rage collapsed into something worse, silence. Real silence. The kind that comes when the performance ends, when the lights go out, when the audience has left and all that remains is a ruined set and a broken actress. She stood there, frozen, makeup smeared, arms hanging limp, breathing like she was trying to keep from drowning. But I was already gone. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually, morally. I wasn't hers anymore. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was done, and she knew it. And that terrified her more than any shout ever could. The beauty of revenge isn't in the explosion, it's in the silence before it. The days when she still smiled at her phone thinking he might text her, when she still curled her hair for the mirror instead of for me, when she still posted filtered selfies with captions about healing and growth. As if I hadn't already traced the entire architecture of her downfall. I began with the basics, passwords. She'd reused the same one across platforms for years, our dog's name, capitalized. I accessed her cloud, her private folder mislabeled, work drafts, her burner email where she kept the digital trail of betrayal so neat and tidy you'd think she was curating it for an exhibit. I downloaded everything, every text, every selfie, every groan-soaked voice memo he'd sent her thinking he was whispering into safety. I backed it all up to 3 locations, a USB in my desk, a hidden drive in the safe, and a cloud folder under a new name she'd never guess. Then came the finances. I'd always been the one who handled our money. She never noticed the slow drain I initiated, subscriptions canceled, cards deactivated, account access revoked. Our joint checking? Split and closed. The savings she thought still existed? Moved under my sole control weeks ago. The shared credit line? Cut with one phone call. She didn't even notice until she tried to use it for a weekend spa trip, when I let her book, let her pack for, then left her at the front desk with a declined card and a smirk from the receptionist. I timed it perfectly. Next came the car. It was under my name, so I reclaimed it. Quietly. She came out of her yoga class one evening and found an empty space. Towed. Legally. Paperwork already filed. Insurance rerouted. Her text came rapid-fire, panicked, confused, then furious. I didn't reply. I let her spiral in silence. Utilities? Transferred. Streaming services? Logged out. Everything she depended on for comfort and distraction, gone with a few clicks. She thought she had time. She thought she could explain, negotiate, manipulate. But I'd already filed. Divorce papers drafted, evidence attached. Infidelity in the age of screenshots isn't a rumor, it's a weapon. And I wielded it without flinching. I opted for fault-based dissolution, which meant her actions were not just personal failures, they were legal liabilities. I didn't even serve her directly. I had the papers sent to her office, hand-delivered, with signature confirmation, while she was in a mid-level management meeting pitching a transparency initiative. She opened the envelope in front of 3 colleagues. I know this because one of them, the only one with a spine, emailed me later and said, it was like watching glass shatter in slow motion. Perfect. But I wasn't done. I sent a curated folder of selected screenshots to her parents, not everything, just enough. The ones where she joked about how gullible I was, the ones where she mocked my quiet nature, called me emotionally dull. Her mother called me crying. Her father didn't say a word, just hung up after I said, I thought you should see the woman your daughter became. I sent nothing to her friends. Didn't need to. Word of mouth spreads like blood in water. Her social circle began to fracture without my involvement. People unfollowed. Texts went unanswered. Her monthly girls' brunch went rescheduled indefinitely. And then came the job. Claudia, the boss I'd spoken to months ago, remember her? I booked a meeting under a different pretense. Brought the evidence folder. Slid it across the table. I wasn't vindictive, I was factual. You have someone in your department using company time, assets, and travel allowances to conduct a long-term extramarital affair. With a subordinate. Claudia didn't blink. She opened the folder. Page after page. Hotel receipts on business trips. Slack messages. Inappropriate use of company email. We'll handle it internally, she said, tone flat and corporate. And I knew what that meant. HR investigation, disciplinary review, potential termination. At best, her precious career would stall. At worst, it would evaporate. All while she still clung to the illusion that she could work things out or get closure. But I wasn't interested in closure. I was interested in clarity, in control, in watching the woman who once thought she was too smart to get caught stumble through the ruins of her perfectly curated lies. She thought she had time. She thought she had leverage. But the game had ended 3 weeks ago. She just hadn't been informed yet. And now, with every asset stripped, every ally distant, every lie unraveling in public view. All she had left was the echo of her own betrayal and the knowledge that the man she underestimated had dismantled her entire world without raising his voice once. It all erupted at her parents' anniversary dinner, the one she insisted I still attend for appearances, the one where she wore white like she was still innocent, like she didn't have the ashes of a broken marriage clinging to her skin. The whole family was there, her parents, her sister, a few of our old friends, even her co-worker Paige, the one who used to giggle a little too loud around me, and him, yes, him, lurking in the back corner like he belonged there, pretending he didn't recognize the man whose life he'd tried to carve himself into. I kept quiet for the first hour, sipping water, answering polite questions, watching her pretend she still owned the room, smiling that strained, forced grin that cracked a little more every time someone looked at her too long. But when her father stood to give a toast about loyalty and commitment, and what it means to truly stand by the one you love, I watched her flinch, and that was my cue. I stood slowly, raised my glass, and said, to commitment, indeed. To the kind of love that lasts beyond hotel rooms and burner phones. The room fell into a hush, so sharp it felt like glass breaking underfoot. She froze. Her mother blinked twice. Her sister's hand went in her mouth. I turned to her and added, "Why don't you tell your father about your weekly strategy sessions at the Red Pine Motel?" Her wine glass slipped, shattered on the floor. He stood up, stammering. "That's not true," she shouted, voice cracking like a whip. "He's twisting things. He's obsessed. Controlling." I turned slowly toward the man in the back. "And you," I said, voice steady, "did you think sneaking into another man's life made you anything more than a footnote in her story?" He tried to speak, raised a hand like maybe he could calm the storm, but her mother stood now too, trembling. "Is it true?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Did you really?" It was emotional at first, she screamed, voice shrill now, desperate. "I was lonely. He made me feel seen. You wouldn't understand. You all live these perfect little lives, perfect." I snapped, stepping forward now, not yelling, just loud enough to cut through her chaos. "You think this was perfect? You think coming home to a ghost, pretending to laugh while dying inside, watching you fade into your phone every night, was perfect?" Someone started filming. I saw the red light in my periphery, and I didn't care. "You think you were the victim because I didn't scream? Because I didn't cheat back? Because I didn't pack a bag the first time I smelled his cologne in your car?" She turned on me, wild-eyed. "You don't get to do this. Not here. This is exactly where it should happen," I said, pointing at her parents. "In front of the people you pretend to impress. In front of the family you lied to. In front of the man you risked everything for, who hasn't said a single word in your defense." Her sister whispered something to her mother. Paige backed away from the table, quietly slipping toward the exit. He just stood there, frozen, jaw clenched, watching the life he barged into disintegrate under the weight of truth. "You smothered me," she screamed, tears now streaming. "You were boring. Predictable. This wouldn't have happened if you were half a man." "No," I said, stepping even closer. "It happened because you have the depth of a puddle and the loyalty of a paper straw. You didn't want a man. You wanted a mirror that told you were still 25 and desired." She tried to slap me then, swung wide, irrational, desperate, but I caught her wrist midair, gently, firmly, and let it go just as fast. "You don't get to hurt me anymore," I said. "Not with words. Not with lies. Not with silence." Her knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Her father turned away, disgusted. Her mother sat back down, silent, devastated. The entire room was quiet, the kind of quiet where shame sits thick in the air, where everyone knows they've just seen someone's mask fall off completely. "So go ahead," I said, scanning the room. "Tell them all again how I ruined your life. How I neglected you. How I made you cheat. But this time, do it without deleting texts or hiding hotel keys." She looked at me then, truly looked, like she was seeing me for the first time not as a man she could bend, but as a man she'd broken, who had learned how to rebuild without her. And that was the final blow. Not the exposure. Not the public shame. But the realization that I no longer cared enough to even hate her. I turned to leave. No more words. No need for a final statement. The silence said enough. And as I walked out of that room, her family shattered, her image ruined, her affair partner standing paralyzed, I didn't look back. Because the only thing colder than revenge is indifference. She fell fast, faster than even I expected, not because I underestimated her ruin, but because I didn't realize how much of her life had been held together by the image of being someone she never truly was. Within 2 weeks of the gallery reveal, Claudia placed her on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. That quickly unraveled into full-blown termination once the HR team saw the timestamped evidence of her affair with a subordinate during company hours. The man she threw it all away for vanished without a word, deleting her from social media, blocking her number, and removing every trace of her existence like she was a stain he needed to bleach from his conscience. Her friends, the ones who used to toast to girl power and reclaiming your spark, ghosted her faster than a dropped call, too embarrassed to be associated with the woman whose lies had gone viral across every private group chat in our town. Her parents, once proud of their polished daughter, now avoided her calls, canceled family events, and whispered apologies to relatives as if she were a headline they couldn't scrub from the internet. She sold her car, moved out of the condo she fought so hard to keep in the divorce, couldn't afford the payments anymore. Last I heard, she rented a tiny one-bedroom in a city 2 hours south, working retail at a boutique no one had heard of, hiding behind oversized sunglasses and cardigans in 90-degree heat. The woman who once curated her life like a Pinterest board was now shrinking, unseen, and irrelevant. She sent me messages, desperate, erratic. First denial, then nostalgia, then outright begging. I still love you. I made a mistake. I didn't know what I had until I lost it. I didn't reply. Silence was the only answer she deserved. Then one day, 3 months after it all collapsed, she came to my house. I watched her through the peephole, standing there like a ghost in a storm, shoulders slumped, hair matted, mascara trailing down her cheeks in streaks of defeat. I opened the door but didn't step aside. She looked up, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling. I miss us, she whispered. I miss who I used to be with you. I stared at her, calm, steady. And then I said, so do I. Too bad she's dead. Her breath hitched. She reached out like I'd softened, like there was still a sliver of hope. Please, she begged, voice cracking under the weight of her own undoing. Just talk to me. Please. I shook my head slowly. We already had our final conversation. You just didn't realize it was the last one. I closed the door before she could say another word. No shouting. No goodbye. Just the sound of a lock sliding into place, sealing the past behind it. She stood there for another minute. I watched her walk away without looking back. The woman I once married, charming, ambitious, adored, was gone, and in her place stood only a cautionary tale of ego, deceit, and consequence. And me? I moved on without dragging her ghost behind me. Because when someone burns the bridge, the only sane choice left is to never cross the ashes. Thank you for listening to my story. Where are you tuning in from, and did you enjoy the ride?